Hi everyone. In this portion of the class, I want to introduce the rough draft of your research paper. So I'm sending this announcement now so that you have plenty of time to work on it before it's due in week 9. So when I say rough draft, I don't want you to panic. It's not a typical rough draft in terms of like, you have to give me 6 of the 10 pages completed. Um, I just have a couple of things that I want you to present to me so that I know that you're on the right track and that I can sort of intercept anything that I maybe didn't get when you submitted topics, or make sure that the study that you want to do is feasible, etc. So, probably the biggest issue that I run into in rough drafts is study population. So we've talked a little bit about the IRB, but because we don't go through that, we cannot do in this class research on protected populations. So what that means is you can't include any minors in your studies, like you can't observe children if you work at a school. You can't observe your friends' kids, even if they say it's okay. Can't do children. You can't do research with pregnant women. So if you're doing a study on couples and one of the women in one of your participating couples is pregnant, you have to exclude her. You can't do research with prisoners. So I've had several law enforcement agents in classes prior to this that have said, oh, well, I have access, but can't do it. And you can't use anyone that has a mental or developmental or physical disability. So as you're thinking about your topic and as you're thinking about your study, make sure that you keep those in mind. The rough draft is graded on 4 different elements, and those are outlined here. I am in the course resources folder. I'm pointing at the screen like you can see what's in my computer. But if you go through course resources over here, and then there's a research paper option, and then the rough draft and final draft option. But the 4 elements are basically, what is the concept? So I want you to give me kind of a breakdown of what it is that you're studying, and then either a hypothesis or a research question related to that. So the difference between them, a hypothesis is usually a directional statement. So when I do X, Y is going to happen, right? You're saying that this is what you think is going to play out. A research question is what you use when you're like, I don't know what happens when Z occurs. And either option is fine for this course. Just make sure that you're being specific about which one you're using. The second element is what research has already been conducted. So for the draft, you only need to compile 3 academic sources that have been used, but you'll need more than that, obviously, for the final draft. And part of this paper is a lit review, and a lit review is basically a synthesis of existing studies that kind of build a rationale for why it is that you're conducting your own study. The third element is what makes it relevant to nonverbal communication. I've added this component because I've had some issues in the past with students who write a really, really great paper on something that's sort of peripherally related to nonverbal communication, but they don't ever actually tie it back to what we talk about in the class. And then you fail because it has nothing to do with nonverbal communication. So for example, you can't talk about the impact of technology on relationships because that's technically computer mediated communication, not nonverbal communication. So while it does have to do with impression management and with relationships, it's not something that we talk about in this class. So just be aware of that. And then finally, the last element is kind of how you think you might study this or test your hypothesis. So you don't have to have the study completed by any means. I just need a rough idea of how it is that you plan to go out and conduct this research, so that if it's not feasible, I can sort of redirect you or help you in that way, so that everybody is on the same page. And assigning it early and reminding you about it often is a really good way to make sure that you aren't throwing it together the day that it's due, because then the work product really suffers. And this paper is a pretty big deal in terms of your final grade in the course, and it's also a really good item to just sort of have in your portfolio. So it would be a really good thing to include in an e-portfolio. It would be a really good thing to show a potential employer for a writing sample. You could hypothetically present it to an undergraduate research conference. There's all sorts of things that are really beneficial that could come from a really well-crafted research paper. And so I want everyone to have the opportunity to do that. So let me know if you have questions moving forward, and be working on these drafts and starting so that I don't have to keep telling you to start. But I'm going to anyway, so you're welcome. Okay, I'll be in touch.